33-34, we were able to see where the police were. So the question that many Kenyans have been asking is, where were they when all this was happening? So maybe it's a reflection point for them, because indeed there are questions that will be asked, and I'm sure there's a report that is coming out on the command structure, particularly on the issues that happened on 27th of March, because Kenyans wondered why so many police officers were deployed to certain places of the country: Kisumu, Kibra, Kawangware, Mukuru kwa Njenga. I could name them, but they were not there when things were happening. And thereafter came, after, was it 24 hours? They came to certain places after 24 hours to conduct investigations. That cannot be seen as utumishi kwa wote. From where we sit, it looks like action and inaction by police officers to not look at certain areas, and particularly because they had intelligence that such an activity was being planned. It could have been disregarded as not credible intelligence, but intelligence nonetheless. There were tweets about it, there was discourse around it, and no Kenyan was surprised when it eventually happened. So indeed, there are questions that Kenyans are asking that we seek to have answers on around what happened and where were the police on that particular day.
All right, and I've pulled up that statement that was released by the Ministry of Interior, and which addresses in part some of what transpired, for example, in Northlands. And I'm working to find that specific portion where they make reference to that. But essentially, he talks about omission. No, sorry, is that your statement talked about omission? But he
Yes.
talks about their resources were spread thin. And Joshua, was it suspicious to you? Because several human rights organizations went to Kibra even after, and they asked, where were the police? Nairobi Governor Johnson Sakaja talked about the fact that the reason they delayed in sending in the fire trucks was because they were not so sure of their safety. With regard to what we are talking about, Northlands, and you said it was it's interesting that it was given prominence over the others whose businesses have been disrupted by the protests. But I just want to pull up that specific portion. And yes, it's section 5 here. It says in Ruiru, within the periphery of Nairobi, mobs of about 2,000 criminals stormed the private property belonging to the family of a retired president of Kenya, where they vandalized the farm, stole livestock, set fires, and attempted to construct makeshift houses, ostensibly to occupy the land. He continues in on the next page, and he says, he also makes reference to Spectre, and he says a smaller gang attempted to storm a business in the industrial area of Nairobi, which is associated with the former Prime Minister of Kenya, who is the principal leader of the current protests. While the quick action of the police and the private security guards repulsed the industrial area criminals, action to protect the Ruiru property was not as quick, owing to what he says are operational constraints caused by the protests that were taking place. What did you make of the length of time it took to not only for the authorities to intervene in, for example, the Northlands situation, but the fact that it took almost 2 days before the Ministry of Interior addressed it? Inspector General of Police was busy with SGR works. He really didn't address it directly. In fact, he didn't even address the situation in Kibra, because you're saying, I mean, the law should apply equally whether you're rich or you're poor. We didn't really see the Inspector General of Police react immediately to the situation in Kibra. What do you make of this failure of those in leadership to react or respond immediately?
It is very unfortunate that the current protest that we are seeing in our country has lost the motion of what it was intended for in terms of the messaging and the narrative and even the action. Because we were told that the opposition group will protest because there is high cost of living, the issues around electoral justice, and high fuel prices, and Kenyans are suffering. I mean, that was the general messaging that carried, the planning of this protest. But we've seen this degenerating into, destruction of property, loss of lives, targeted attacks of individual properties, whether prominent or less prominent. We are seeing that. And again, profiling of ethnic, communities. Because what is emanating here is, discussions, whether accurate or not accurate. And I think also this has also been compounded by escalating, disinformation and misinformation, whereby, photos from even, Democratic Republic of Congo were being circulated. Photos of the 2008 post-election violence being circulated, and even alarming tweets by prominent leaders and utterances that are just meant to create animosity among communities. But you ask a very good question, that where were the police in all this? We could also see some level of delays, because again, the state, the government of Kenya has a responsibility for rapid response should there be a breach of security, whether it is associated with the protest or not. But again, this is not new in our country. We saw the banditry and the cattle rustling in Kerio Valley. It was not until when people even went into demonstration in Kerio Valley to demand for government action for the protection of the citizenry that were being killed by bandits in Kerio Valley. And we saw that occurring even several months until when the police were being deployed there, and they would show that probably they are also being defeated until the military were also sent in Kerio Valley. So this is not new in Kenya. That is just an isolated case. It's only that it has been politicized, because we've also seen some level of unresponsiveness. But again, when you analyze it deeply, we suffer. Our democracy suffers from capture of certain institutions where they play tune politically to the government that is in place. And that is very wrong. That is not what the Constitution talks about, regardless of the political divide. Even this discussion that we're having on the right to protest, it could be Azimio this time that we are discussing about them going to the streets. But also Kenya Kwanza could also want and desire to picket over a certain matter. They will have equal rights, and they will also need that protection from the police equally, the way the Azimio would also be having. But again, the last bit is that that incident that we saw in that private farm and the industry or the factory in Mombasa Road was very unfortunate. The destructions in Kibra and Kisumu, Homa Bay and Migori was also very unfortunate, and it must be condemned. And we demand that the police gives us an answer, and we are happy that the CS Interior and the Inspector General of Police and even the diplomatic community yesterday demanded that investigations needs to be done, and an answer communicated to Kenyans on who were the perpetrators and how they have been held responsible in accordance with the law.
Okay. And Julie, in his statement, the Interior Minister, Cabinet Secretary, made reference to certain episodes of destruction. He referenced mainly Nairobi and Kisumu. And today, a tweet from Makau Mutua, who's part of this convoy, and he said, when the police don't show up or rush the people, the demos are peaceful, completely peaceful. Let those who have ears hear and those who have eyes see. In Embakasi South, and the massive crowds in Embakasi South and massive crowds couldn't have been more peaceful. We officially entered into what he's referring as a velvet revolution. But in response to his tweets, people posted videos of watu wakiporwa. Somebody posted, shared the Nation breaking, or actually this is Standard Digital, of the UDA offices in Siaya County being vandalized. So how, yes, you're saying the police should protect these protesters. And yes, they have a right to protest. But then there is the criminal element that usually infiltrates, or so we are told, these gatherings and create wanton destruction. Does the Public Order Act in such instances allow the police not to permit peace processions of any nature?
It's an interesting question, because if you see the current protests as they're unfolding, by and large, where the convoys are, there is some semblance of peace. However, we cannot then bury our heads in the sand and say that criminality is not taking place within the protests. There are civilians, there are people who are taking advantage of the protests to do illegal actions. And we are not saying that we agree with that. Actually, we condemn it in the highest way possible. And in our statement, by the statement that ICJ Kenya released, we called on the citizenry to abide by the law, to actually realize that their duty is to ensure that any person who conducts a criminal action is even reported to the police themselves. Because these protests are to serve a particular agenda. Is it to foster the petition of their issues to the various authorities? But it's not a safe haven for people to do anything and everything outside the bounds of the law. We have actually called on the Inspector General of Police to investigate the various actions of illegality that have taken place, and for the ODPP to prosecute those people who have taken advantage of these protests, to actually bring people to book. And that is the unfortunate thing within our society. There are people who are well-meaning. There is an agenda that is being driven by the Azimio, and they want to drive that agenda. However, there are people who are taking advantage of these protests to commit illegal actions. And we are not saying that the police should only protect and facilitate these protests. Indeed, the police have the other duty, which is to protect all Kenyans, property of all Kenyans, and the country at large. So indeed, they should still be doing their duty to arrest those who are committing illegal actions, get the evidence and bring them to court so that prosecutions can take place within the order of the law. So yes, there is a delicate balance, because unfortunately, even as you attempt, and we have all organized peaceful assemblies, even as civil society we have, we always ask the police to facilitate these peaceful assemblies, because we realize that there are people who will take advantage of the peaceful assembly that we are trying to convene to do other illegal actions. And those people should be condemned in the highest terms possible. This is not the opportunity to get a smartphone. This is not the opportunity to stone someone's car. It is wrong. It is illegal. And we condemn those people. And at the same time, we ask, can the police, using their various mechanisms, infiltrate those crowds to pull out those bad apples, to ensure that those people are actually held accountable for their actions? Because if we do a blanket condemnation on the right to protest, then people will not have an avenue to present petitions to the respective authority that they want to. The other day, we saw a peaceful assembly of persons who were from the small business community, who are saying that they are disenfranchised by the entry point of an international player into the market. And they were able to submit their petition peacefully. So we need that kind of vibrant democracy to be protected, because everyone has that right. So the question should be, where is the security agency when those illegal actions are being taken? How are the police responding to, one, the protect of the protests, but also the illegal actions that are taking place? We cannot blanketly condemn protests. We need to ensure that protests are protected and are made in a very democratic way. Yeah.
Okay. Kenya's circumstances, because a lot of the time we draw comparisons with the developed world, and I've heard people say in France, people are able to protest even outside Parliament. Israel, people have referenced Israel and the European Union, Brussels, name it. They say protests go on, life goes on. But here in Kenya, Joshua, you see there's very little traffic today, at least what I've experienced. On Monday, nearly all the businesses within Kimathi Street, Kenyatta Avenue, Mama Ngina, all the way were shuttered. They were closed. Is our democracy still too young to draw comparisons with the developed world? What's your view?
Yeah, having protests in this country has a history, and there have been benefits that have been realized. And this is from the background which we grew our democracy. We've had a repressive regime. We've had actually repressive regimes in this country. And the only means that Kenyans secured their freedoms, their democratic freedoms, was through protests. And we read in books, through the Kamkunji, in the trenches, having people who are courageous to come out and speak, whether through the universities, the churches, and it even made them.
What the tactic of the security forces is here, whether we're protecting property,